All right, let's go ahead and just get started anyway. My name is Dana Bickford. I work for Doug, as does Dick Hendy, who is on the line with us. And we are going to conduct this meeting this afternoon on working capital. That's the topic. We can talk about anything else if you want. But the topic du jour is working capital. And it's a pretty darned important one from our perspective. Dick and I both work in the ACE program, which typically engages with an AE just prior to closing on their deal. We will take about 2 or 3 weeks to get you ready to go in on day one. And we will work with the AEs typically for about 5 months, 6 months after closing to accomplish a number of different objectives. And one of the things we see very, very frequently, in fact, almost all the time, it's a subject of conversation, is the topic of working capital. And more than that, it's liquidity. So I've prepared a little presentation for you that will guide the initial part of the conversation. And hopefully everybody will have the concept that we want to present. And then Dick will take you through an extremely valuable tool that he has developed and that will help you manage your working capital as an entrepreneur. So let me find my. Let me just a second. Can everybody see this?
Yep. Yes.
Okay, I'm glad you can because I'm not sure I can. Hang on just a second. Here we go. Okay. Just to sort of get everybody's attention, when you're talking about working capital, I would ask you what could possibly go wrong, and there is plenty. We're going to cover some of that today. Can you still see it?
Yep.
All right. Good. Let's talk about what it is and what it isn't. Working capital is it's a concept. It's not a thing. It's a concept, and it's discussed a lot in financial circles and acquisitions, banking, accounting, etc. It's an interchangeable word in most cases, the way it's used, with a term called net working capital. And you might ask what the difference is, and I'll help you understand that pretty quickly. We won't belabor the accounting treatment of it at all. But the GAAP definition, and that means generally accepted accounting principles, the GAAP definition means current assets minus current liabilities. And so current assets are assets that convert to cash within 12 months, at least in theory they do. Current liabilities are obligations that are payable within 12 months. And this is just a simple accounting term, or a couple of terms, assets and liabilities. The key thing, though, the important part of this is liquidity. And that's the ability to convert your assets into cash to pay your bills. And that involves time and certainty. So it may take an asset, say inventory or a receivable, some time to convert. It takes you a while to collect it. And there's also the probability of collection inherent in that receivable. Will the obligor pay it? So those are things you need to be tuned into, and not everybody is when you're looking at these upfront, looking at a purchase agreement and thinking about all the things you need to think about before you make this acquisition. Working capital is only one measure of liquidity, and we tend to talk about it as if it's the only one, and it's not. So net working capital, I'm going to give you a simplified example in just a minute. Current assets minus current liabilities actually equal net working capital. So you can't pay your bills with working capital. You really can't do anything with it. You can look at it. You can understand it, which is really important, but it won't pay your bills for you. It won't pay your payroll, won't pay your vendors, your taxes, your equipment costs, anything else. Real liquidity can be very easily hidden within an acceptable, quote unquote, working capital number. So if somebody says to you in the course of negotiations, I'll leave you $400,000 in working capital in your company, dig into that number. That's not a real accurate way of thinking about this. So the treatment in the purchase agreement needs to be very specific, and it's very important. Let me see if I can take you to a let me see if I can take you to an example here. Well, here we go. Can you see this?
Yeah, it looks like the same thing was up before.
Yes, it does. And let me go back here. Let me share something different here. How about this?
Yep.
Okay. All right, so let's take a look at this example. And just to keep things simple at first. Here's working capital. Here are your current assets. I made these numbers up, but they're not atypical, and it could be very similar to what you'll see when you buy your company. You'll have, these are all current assets on the left-hand side, down to total current assets of 615,000. So you've got, typically you'll find cash, accounts receivable, some inventory, maybe some prepaid expenses and a couple other things, but these are the real critical ones. The top three are the important working capital current assets, if you follow me. And current liabilities will include vendors payable, current maturities of notes payable, wages payable, taxes, rents, etc. So in this case, if you look at what your net working capital number is, it's going to be your current assets of $615,000 minus your current liabilities of $659,000, and you've got a negative number. You've got a negative net working capital. So what that means, it's important to understand what it means. It's not good or bad in and of itself. But what it means is if you stopped all operations and everything today and simply liquidated the company, you'd come out with owing, in this case, $44,000 of debt to somebody over here. This is what you wouldn't be able to pay. So let me add a different number here. In this case, if you liquidated everything today, all operations stop. You'd come out with a positive $56,000 by simply liquidating these current assets and paying off all these current liabilities. You'd come out with a positive 55,000. Now, let's take this example right now, and you're going to closing, and this is what you expect. You expect $200,000 in cash. You expect $400,000 in receivables. I'm going to change this just a second. Let's go back to the original example. It'll make the example better. 200,000 in cash, 300,000 in receivables, inventory no change, prepaids no exchange, no change. So, and then let's take a look at what you've got to come up with this week to pay, or actually in 2 weeks after closing. Let's say you close, in 2 weeks from closing date, you've got to pay a bunch of bills. So in this case, you got to pay the trade. You have to pay notes payable on your current maturities, your monthly payment on your SBA note, $40,000. You have wages payable of 28, and you've got rents payable of $4,000, likely to the prior owner. So you owe, in 2 weeks, you're going to owe $97,000. You've got $200,000 in cash here, $300,000 in receivables. How's everybody feeling about that? You feel comfortable? Just go ahead and speak out. Anybody have an opinion? Anybody? Go ahead.
My initial thought, this is Dan, my initial thought is that I've got cash to cover it, but I'm curious how current those receivables are. Is that are those receivables also coming in? Is the timing congruent?
Good answer. Yeah, good answer, Dan. So it's the right answer. Let me change things a little bit. Let's and did everybody understand that? That's a great answer. You're spot on. You've got $97,000 to cover it, but that leaves you basically a little over $100,000 for 2 weeks later when you need to start paying bills again, right? So there's a bit of tension there, right? Let's say you go in right before closing, the seller tells you, I'm going to leave you $100,000 in cash, but not 200 like we talked about 2 weeks ago. But I'll leave you 100, but I'm going to leave you another $100,000, so you'll have 400,000 in receivables. How do you feel about that? Anybody? Dan, any thoughts on that one?
I'm less comfortable, right? I want to know how soon these receivables. Is this should expect these in a week or 2 weeks? But I'm less comfortable because I'm about to liquidate all of my very liquid assets.
Yeah, just to expand on what Dan's saying, I guess I'd want to know more about those receivables he's adding in there. I mean, are we factoring it all for any sort of like bad debt? Has that already been excluded from any of this? What's the likelihood that we're actually going to collect on that?
You're both right. What if I were to tell you that $150,000 of that 400 are 60 days or more past due? There's a lot of retainage. There's a couple of disputes in there. There's other stuff that you don't even know what it is. That would make you even less comfortable, wouldn't it?
Yes.
So you need to really understand what you're getting. And just because if you look here, these are the same, these are different numbers. This was 200, this was 300 to start out with. The net working capital number was the same, right? It was 44,000 negative. But this is a very different liquidity position, isn't it? Because you don't know what you've got here. And if you've got past dues or a ton of retainage in there, and we'll get into some other things that could be impacting the liquidity of the company that you need to be aware of going in and pay a lot of attention to and really track closely. Does that make sense, everybody? Does there anybody not get that, or anybody have any questions? Dan, your answer was spot on to begin with, and the second one was spot on as well. You know, liquidity is different than working capital, but a lot of times people in the financial business talk about working capital like it's liquidity. Don't let that fool you. Okay. Everybody get that? Any questions at all?
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
How common is it to see this versus, I would think, I come from the real estate world, and I would think that if you want to make your business look as good as possible as you're going to sell it, you would want to receive as many of those old accounts, as much of that money as possible, to leave the new buyer in the best position as possible as to get the deal done. Is that more common, or is this more common where you're walking into more of what I would consider a mess?
I'd have trouble answering that question right now, but I can tell you what I've seen. I've seen both, actually. And the one that troubles me most is the seller who is trying to get as much cash out of this company as he can before he sells it. And that can come at the very last minute, literally. Dick, do you have any thoughts on that? That's a great question, by the way.
Yeah, and I also think it all depends upon how good the internal accounting department is. If they really don't understand some of the general accepted accounting practices, they may show receivables, but they may not even have an aging schedule of how long they've been outstanding. So in the same way with inventory can be real obsolete if you're working in the computer industry. And that computer that you bought or equipment that you bought for resale that you bought for $10,000 in that fast-moving tech business may be worth $1,000 next week because some new device has come out that's just revolutionized the market. So it really depends upon the accounting staff's internal understanding of accounting methods and how they account for things.
Great point. We've seen a ton of that. A lot of these little companies are, they're not on accrual accounting. They're not on cash accounting. They're on some kind of a hybrid that takes a fair amount of interpretation. Any other questions?
Hi, I have a question.
Yes, sir.
How much cash would you save for this type of business to have on hand? There looks like a 97,000 weeks cash flow in 2 weeks. What would your recommended cash on hand be just on a week-to-week basis, just to maintain your bills?
It's hard. You can't answer that without knowing the business. I did not set this up with any kind of business in mind. It's really to show the principles involved related to the liquidity concept and what really pays your bills, which is cash. I don't know really how to answer that. I don't know that there's a formula. that you can
Would
apply.
you recommend having 3 times, 4 times? Like, what's a safe place to be, just in terms of an operational standpoint for a business?
How well has a business been performing? How solid are the customers? Are these premier customers that are, have been paying on time every time for the last 5 years, or are they major, Fortune 100 companies that will drag you out for the next 90 days? Entirely creditworthy, but they will drag you out as long as they can because they know they can. Or are they little bitty things that, don't have the cash, and this company has been selling to the lower end, the lower tier, in order to get revenues? And keep in mind, you don't really know, because you're going to go into it utilizing a fair amount of debt that has repayment terms on it that the seller probably did not have. I don't know, Dick, you may have a thought on that as well, but those are what come to mind to me right away.
Yeah, and another thing to keep in mind is that this is assuming that there's no additional business coming in. So if you're doing $100,000 a week in business, and you collect the $100,000 in receivable this week, you may have that replaced next week by the additional revenue or not revenue, but the additional work that you did. So if you're running your budget or your projections, and you base it upon historical information, and all of a sudden a new owner comes in place, those sales may not continue. So instead of collecting or doing $100,000 in volume a week, it may be down to 75. So you really can't count on those receivables that you're being paid being replaced by new receivables, if that makes sense.
Did that help?
It helped a little bit. It kind of reminds me, because I'm a former pharmacy owner, so we would get paid basically 3 weeks out. We would set our inventory 3 weeks out, so we get paid by insurance on a 3-week rolling basis. We always had to have enough cash on hand to make sure that we're paying, our vendors, wages, payable, taxes, rents, and everything like that. And I've been out of business for a couple of years. I'm just trying to think, what is a cushy cash level to sit on given the amount of outflows. Like right now, I'm looking at the screen, it doesn't look good. I mean, it's basically almost near bankruptcy. You need an injection of cash real quick, just based upon the outflows and what cash you have on hand. Like I said, I don't know how long the accounts receivable when they're receiving the cash. They're getting the cash on a week to week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks out, 4 weeks. I don't know. But right now, this business looks on edge. So just for any business, for that matter, it's, what cash is it? 3 times cash on hand? What is a good level? That's what I'm not understanding.
It's going to depend on your company, on everything from gross margins to collection patterns, to the nature of the business. And let's go into a lot of the companies that we see are involved in some pretty big jobs and contracts. And I've addressed some of that. I have not attempted to help you figure out a formula to do that. You're going to know that pretty quickly, or you should know that. And Dick is going to take you through a cash projection model that he has developed that we use with our ACE clients. And that model is something that I've used in the past, and it's really tailored to the company, not just a rule of thumb. If you had a pharmacy business, the chances are the dynamics and the metrics of that business may have been very, very different from some of the contractors that we see here, plumbers or electricians or various other types of contractors. So it's going to really depend on the company itself the industry it's in, and who you're in business with. But you've got the right idea, and the right idea is figure it out quickly for your company and make sure you can build up to that. If you've got dependable numbers on the history of the company that you're looking at, that should give you some pretty good clues to how to think about that, if that makes some sense.
Yeah, and I think and going to your point, Dana, I think that's why it makes the rolling cash flow even that much more important, because you're looking at that, and as I'll show you when we get into that, you can make some decisions on who and when to pay and who and when not to pay, just based upon where your cash position will be.
And Evan, you're right. I consciously made this really on the wire, this little example here, because I wanted people to understand the importance of the differences. I didn't want people to assume that working capital is kind of a be all end all phrase, that if you've got X dollars in working capital, you're good. You're not, and you can't be. And what you're really trying to assess is how much liquidity do I need for this company, and what are the components of the liquidity. And for instance, you look in accounts receivable, not all receivables are the same. So you need to understand the quality of them and how they convert to cash. So
cash is king. Am I correct?
Yeah, cash is king. In the land of the blind, the one-armed or the one-eyed man is king. It's one of my old boss's sayings. Let me get back to the presentation.
And I'll play on that theme as we move on to the next thing, and that is, I wrote down as we were talking here that not all assets are created equally.
Mm-hmm.
And cash is king, as we mentioned. ARs need to be collected from a base of customers based upon their ability to pay you. So you may have closed on a big deal, say an electrician just may have rewired a building that the client's going to move into, and it's a retail operation, it's a coffee shop. Well, he's got to unlock the door in the morning and hope customers come in and buy coffee. And if they don't, he can't pay you what you think you're going to get next month. So that all receivables are not created equally. In the same way with inventory, that's not created equal either. As I mentioned with the tech business, that inventory keeps changing in value all the time, and what you pay for it may not be what it's worth. Then there's the other side of the assets, which are the non-current assets, which are the fixed assets. Those things depreciate in value, so they may be on your books for a good dollar amount, or you may have paid a lot of money for it, and you think you can go out and get a loan for it. And it's not worth as much when you're trying to get a loan as it was when it was new. And so again, all fixed assets are not created equally, as well as notes receivable. Again, you've got to have somebody dependent upon paying you to collect that money. So there's a lot of moving parts in this that if you don't understand, it can get you in trouble in a hurry.
Can you all see this? Can you see back to the presentation?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay. So we went through the example. We've talked about some of these. One of the things that we've noticed, if you're looking at what could impact your liquidity post close, you close on it. Everybody's excited. You've met all your new employees. And then, on day 2, you're really starting to deal with all of the issues that now fall in your lap. One of those things that seems to be a common theme, I don't think it always happens, but it happens an awful lot, and that is a drop in revenue post-closing. Sometimes the seller takes their foot off the gas. Sometimes there's a seasonality impact. Sometimes the new guy comes in and the existing repeat customers are wary. They don't know if they want to keep doing business with this company because George, the guy that they've been dealing with for 10 years, is no longer in charge. They don't know who they can trust, all that kind of stuff. That is a common theme. So you've got to be ready to address that fairly quickly, and you want to retain the seller's assistance, introductions to all of the customers. You may want the seller to do some bidding for you, because a lot of times that seller is the chief bidder for the company. You may, in part of your negotiations, it's not uncommon for a seller to say to the buyer, "We've got this great backlog. We've got $1 million in backlog. Some great jobs in here, blah, blah, blah." And then you find out that the larger jobs there don't start for 4 months. What do you do between now and then? So you really want to focus on the jobs, and we'll get into that in just a minute. I've got something I can send to you guys through Doug that will help you sort of evaluate the kinds of jobs that they've got and where they stand with them. You're also back to what Evan was talking about. What's the collectability of those receivables? You want to be going through those with the seller, not just 2 days before closing. You really want to track that and see what that looks like over time as part of your diligence. And I hope that makes sense to everybody. Here's something else. The second to the last bullet point here is you could find that your bidder, your experienced bidder, whether it's the seller or somebody else, might leave post-closing. And they just want to retire. They don't like the way you part your hair. Somebody else made them an offer. Whatever the case is, that can happen. We'll talk in a minute about what you do about that. Besides, there are things to think about, about whether or not you can replace them. So the key point is that any of those situations can rapidly consume your liquidity. You may have to make some pretty quick decisions about how to preserve your liquidity. It may be a combination of, putting a full court press on building revenue, building a backlog, and it may also mean trimming some of your staff, some of your workers. And those are hard decisions, but you need to make sure you're considering everything you need to do to make sure the company preserves its liquidity. Any questions on that, guys? Okay. Revenue generation. We've seen some examples where critical expertise left, one of which is a bidder. We have examples of very complex HVAC companies doing a lot of commercial work, having a key skilled commercial HVAC person, that gets nervous and may want to leave. So that's something. We've seen examples of master electricians may want to leave or may be very difficult to manage. So you want to think through who your key people are before you buy it, and you talk with your seller a lot about that and what they would do, and really think critically of those needs, because they can impact your revenue, thus your working capital, liquidity, all that. A couple of the things to think about that we've come across. Some of the companies have looked and found that local expertise may be difficult to find, but they can find it remotely. That's an interesting experience for a couple of the companies we've dealt with. Another one of the companies bought a firm in a very heavily unionized town. And so it was difficult to get people who would go to work for a non-union shop. That's a challenge. And I would just make sure you understand what that situation looks like before you go in. There's also in some types of businesses, licensing requirements for key skills. Excuse me. Those are important to understand. What's it take to get licensed? Should you get licensed? Can you go out and hire somebody that's licensed? Pardon me. Those are all key issues. Pardon me. Apologies, guys. I have some of what Doug has. All right. So back to the presentation. Can you still see it okay?
Yep.
Okay. My apologies. There's a little bit of food for thought when it comes to negotiations. And I don't recall exactly who it was that asked about this, but a bit of a common approach that we see often, and it can be perilous if you're not careful, is, the buyer and seller agree to split receivables as of the closing date. And what could go wrong with that idea? We have seen, especially in situations where there is cash accounting utilized, where receivables are split, and as they're collected, they're split between the buyer and the seller. And in one case that I'm aware of, was cash accounting. Pardon, I'm so sorry. There was cash accounting in the payables were not included in taking care of these numbers. And so the buyer was stuck with 6 weeks worth of expenses without having a single dollar of receivables coming in to fund them. That was a big surprise. And it was because the working capital definition was really, really loose and not well thought out. Another approach that I saw that I actually kind of liked is where the buyer and the seller defined a net working capital number that would occur at closing. So receivables minus payables would equal $1 number, and they would add X dollars worth of cash, or Y dollars in this case worth of cash. And they had a formula for either the buyer or the seller to reimburse the other. And in this case, the buyer would reimburse the seller if the buyer, if there was too much working capital received, and the seller would reimburse the buyer immediately if there wasn't enough cash received. So it was kind of an unusual arrangement, but it worked. So understanding the importance of the jobs in progress report, let's take a look at that. One of the other things that you'll see, or you may see, is you get really close to closing, and the seller says, "Look, I sold this big job. You're going to have the benefit of this job, and they just paid us. We've just invoiced them for $150,000, and I'm going to take that at closing." and it effectively becomes double dipping into your purchase price. So you really need to understand what they're asking for. I wouldn't necessarily just agree to that because they went out and made the sale. You could offer to pay a commission on it. There's probably other good ways of handling that. But that is potentially perilous depending on who your seller is. Dick, did I say that reasonably correctly?
Yep. And I think you've got a couple of hands up.
Okay. Go ahead.
I think Dan had his hand up, and then
I'll go. I was just wondering, and Dane, I understand rules of thumb are hard to define in the absence of a business. But do you have you've talked about some arrangements that were sort of risk mitigating, I guess. How soon do you think about raising the issue of net working capital? Is that like an LOI topic that you can avoid a lot of time wasted, or do you typically advise to hold off on opening that discussion up with a seller?
Yeah, I'm not, it's been a minute since I've looked at the LOI template that I've seen float around here. So I'm not sure how to answer that right off the top of my head, and I don't want to misdirect you. I think it's important to think about it quickly. I don't know that I would get into the details of it in your LOI. I think your LOI is more a tool for asserting that you're serious, and you don't want the seller going out shopping it while they're talking to you and pitting you against somebody else. And you're going to have counsel help you draw that thing. So I would look to counsel
Okay.
for that. Now, as you get into diligence, you're going to ask for a bunch of these things. You're going to ask, I would ask for a minimum of 3 years of financial statements. I like to see 5 or more, but I'm an ex-banker, so please forgive me, but I am. But you want to see how the company performs over time, and time usually means up cycles and down cycles. So you kind of want to see what that looks like. So the longer you can get, the better off you are. And a lot of them will just say, well, we just gave you three years. Okay. If that's all you can get, that's all you can get. But I would be asking for receivables agings, and I would ask for them, depending on how often they bill, no less than once a month, and maybe every other week or something, to get receivable agings and get the seller to go over them with you. I want to learn about these customers, and you're going to do the same with the jobs in progress report. And many of them, I don't know about most of them, but a lot of them will say, "What's that?" Or we don't create one of those. And I'm going to give you a tool that you could actually send to them, or send part of it to them, and you can say, "I want you to fill this out."
Okay.
That would be what I'd do. I'd push them on it, because that's what's going to tell you how their jobs impact liquidity in that company, and they're all going to be different. A home builder is different than an electrician is different than a plumber, and they've all got different kinds of jobs, different than HVAC. So, and they've all got different customers. So you really want to screw down on what it is they're doing, and the more information you have, the more intelligently you can figure out what your working capital and liquidity needs really are and how you want to negotiate it. That's kind of my approach to it. So I don't know I hope that made sense.
That was helpful. Thank you.
And I think Pundit, is that how she pronounced her, or he pronounced her name, had a question too.
Yes, this is Puneet. I was I think you may have answered some of it. I mean, a business I'm dealing with that has a couple of LOIs, everything is done on a cash basis, QuickBooks. So the reporting is pretty awful. But I guess that my question is, if they don't even have a balance sheet and things like that, is that stuff that I would get after they accept an LOI? Because I've asked, and it's just a mom and pop shop. It's an acupuncture clinic, right? That's throwing off cash. How would you sort of handle that?
Geez, you're almost in a position of having to create it yourself.
That's what I'm thinking.
Are they a cash business? Is that what they are?
No, 70% is insurance, but they just yeah, it's two of them, and they're generating 1.2 million, just the two of them, and it's ridiculous. So
Do they track they've got to track their billing somehow?
yeah, they have QuickBooks and an accountant. I mean, I was grilling them like how many patients per week, what percent is insurance, and all this, but then one of them is like, I'm just not a numbers person. I know I should, and I just at the end of the month I do stuff for taxes, and so they must have an accountant, but I'm dealing with the broker and
Yeah.
them. But so that's what I thought. I mean, I kind of want to move forward with an LOI. I haven't even finished the accelerator training with you guys, but I kind of feel like I need to like rush this a little bit. It's non-binding, but
Yeah. It strikes me you'll need their checking account records.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, you'll need to see, and they've got to track how they invoiced. So they've got something that shows that.
okay.
I would ask them for that. I would ask them to go back 12 months. I want to see what this looks like. And, maybe longer, but, and Dick, you may have an opinion about that, but I would look at their checking account and see who they've been writing checks to, and what those checks are for.
Right. Yeah. And in that business, you also want a breakdown of what percentage is Medicare, Medicaid, and what percentage is private carrier, because Medicare or Medicaid will set the rate, and that rate in some cases, may not even be enough to cover your expenses, but it's enough to make the cash register ring. So they may not be, making any money at what they're doing. They're just, going through the motions. And then a lot of the private carriers will have time periods when they go out and reset the rates. And so you may want to ask that, who their carriers are, and when was the last time you got a rate change from them or a rate upgrade from them? Because there could be a lot of moving parts to that business.
Okay. Is it still, I mean, given that it's non-binding and I could back out,
Yeah, right.
could I still put forth an LOI? And
Yeah, the LOI is just kind of a letter of intent. It's not a commitment for you to do anything. It's saying, all things being equal, I'm interested, you're interested in selling, I'm interested in buying. I would if you do sign a letter of intent, I would make sure you lock it up for, 30 days or 15 days or whatever it is, so that they don't go out and shop the deal, and you spend a lot of time and effort, and then they come back to you and they say, oh, well, I've got a commitment now. And so your letter of intent's no good. So make sure you get that in there someplace, that it's a frozen period while the letter of intent's in place.
okay, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Dick, why don't you take them through the 13-week?
Okay.
And I apologize. I didn't realize this much time had gone by.
Yeah. If you want to stop sharing your screen, I'll try to put mine up, and I can run through this fairly fast. And I'll also send this to Dane, and he can send it out to you all. But this is something that we put together for a couple of our clients, and I've used it for my clients for over a long time. But it looks, when you first look at it, it looks very, whoops. How come it's not color? It's not going out of white. Can you see that, or is it still dark?
Yep, can see it.
Okay. It's a 13-week rolling cash flow. And what you're doing is you're taking your cash on hand at the very top of, and I put down Monday, try to do these things or recommend they do them on Mondays because it just is the start of the week. And then you kind of look at your big outstanding checks. You don't have to worry about, the $10 check you wrote to the paper boy. Look at the bigger outstanding checks. So that'll come up then with the available amount of cash that you have for the week. And then you look at your receivables, and you can either identify the larger ones, or you can just put them all in a total normal collection for sales based upon some historical data from the company. So now you're coming up with your cash, and then you've got your receivables that you're going to collect, your total collections. And then you come down, and how come I can't roll this thing?
Are you on the actual document itself?
Yes.
Hmm.
Maybe I'll have to stop sharing and go out and refind it again. Well, let's see. While I'm trying to find it, this is the section that can be kind of overwhelming when you first look at it. You say, how am I going to get all those numbers every week? And you can do it fairly easily by just taking your big numbers. See if I can grab this again. No, it's not letting me grab it, but again, down here, you're going to take out your expenses, things that you got to pay other people for in cash. Your biggest one is your workers. Your workers aren't going to take an IOU. They want cash in their account every week. And I've got this broken down by office workers and outside workers. And then you've got to pay the government the amount of withholding tax for Social Security and Medicare that you take out of their salary, and you've got to pay your portion. And so then you've got to pay a workers' compensation usually, and all other insurances, your telephone, your utilities, your legal account, your fuel and tolls for your workers. And then I just put in here all other expenses, and that's the ones that require a monthly payment in cash. And as you can see, you're paying some of these every week, but you're paying some, like your telephone, your utilities, and your accountant, and maybe your credit cards for your fuel and tolls. You're paying them monthly. So one week you're going to have 37,000, but the next week you only may have 33 or 32 because you don't have all those payments in there. And I wish this thing would roll, but I can't get it to roll. But then you come down to your loan payments. And you've got to make your loan payments. You got to make the payment to the bank. You got to make the payment to the maybe a seller's note. So once you deduct that, then you also have to look at, okay, to do my business, I had to buy $10,000 worth of air compressors or whatever from a supplier. And they have a payment coming due also this first week of the month. And what you're going to wind up with at the end of that week period, you're going to wind up with either a negative or a positive figure. And if it's a negative figure, then you hopefully have got a line of credit that you can pull and cover that. But if you don't, then you've got to go back into receivables and say, who can I collect from quicker than I thought? Or you go to payables, who can I not pay everything I owe them this week, and who can I extend out to maybe next week or the following week to get that back to a positive figure. And so then when you get that ending figure for the week, then you bring it up here to the next week and keep going. What you'll find, and I didn't fill in all of these just because it's an estimate of, and you'll never get this to balance to anything. It's an estimate of collections and estimate of payables. And if you do this right, you'll find at the bottom, you'll see a negative figure maybe 10 weeks out. So you know you've got that nut coming, you've got to cover it somehow. So then you go back in and say, and we've had this situation happen where an individual did not have a line of credit. They couldn't, stop any of the payables that they have, couldn't stop paying your customers. So you wind up having to do something and either have friends or family put money into the company to cover that, or try to get a line of credit from an outside lender. I guess it's 4 o'clock now, Dana. I don't know if you want to stop and we can, I can send this out to everybody, and or we can continue maybe next week.
What's the consensus of the group? What would you all like to do? I know I've got something I need to go to. Some others may as well. I don't know about yourself, Dick.
Yeah, why don't we try to do it next week, and I'll try to figure out how to make this so I can scroll down and do a better presentation on it.
Would that be helpful to everyone?
That works for me.
Sure. Yeah. I don't know if there's a schedule for these weekly calls, like if we're sacrificing a topic that's on the docket. That's my only hesitation, but this is helpful.
Okay, I will talk to Doug. I can tell you that Dick has done a wonderful job with a number of our ACE entrepreneurs who have utilized the tool he's describing now, and it is incredibly helpful. Incredibly helpful. It has helped some adjust their own receivables and their liability payments. It's also helped some approach the SBA successfully because they knew time with enough time in advance for the SBA to actually make a change in how the repayment of their note was made. So this is an important topic that everybody really needs to understand when you're managing a small business, for sure.
Yeah, and lenders hate surprises. And if you don't do something like this and your payment's due on the first of the month, and all of a sudden you've got no money in your account, and you go to them and they say, I can't make a payment this month. Well, when did you find that out? And you say, today. That's not going to go over very big with them to give you kind of concessions to get you through the hurdle.
The other thing that it helps with is in the course of the analysis in doing this, when we've been on the phone call with the AEs as they confront the cash shortage that is impending, and they know it's 7 weeks out and they know they've got to do something about it, we help them think through that process and think through the arguments to make with the SBA and some of their vendors and others as well. So it's a tool that can be very, very helpful to you. So, I will talk with Doug, Dan, to your
Thanks.
point, I will talk with Doug about how he sees the, the schedule of these. I don't know what his scheduled meetings are, what the topics are, but I'll visit with him, and if it makes some sense, we'll bring it in next week as well.
Yeah, thanks. For me, this is really helpful, so appreciate it. It's
Yeah.
very cool to walk through these tools.
Yeah,
Okay.
if you don't think it's helpful, I guarantee you will later on. So, you're all about to become risk managers, and this stuff will help. So thank you all.
Thank you.
Take care.
Okay,
Thank you so much.
you
Take
bet.
care.
Bye-bye.